What you are seeing now is not a game or a movie, but a real scene of the pursuit of fugitives in the United States in 1994. At that time, the Los Angeles police dispatched dozens of police cars and helicopters to follow the white wild car all the way. Major TV stations canceled their prime-time programs and broadcast the whole chase live. In just a few hours, the number of viewers exceeded 100 million. The police did not dare to approach rashly because the man in the car was extraordinary. He was a legendary figure in American history. Simpson was like Forrest Gump in the movie. He had rickets since he was a child and had to rely on braces to walk. But such a disabled person relied on extraordinary perseverance to run from the middle school football team to the university and rushed into the professional game. In 1973, the 26-year-old Simpson broke the record and became history. He was the first football player in history to sprint more than 2.000 yards. After retiring, he successfully moved to the film and television industry and the business world and became an American Idol. However, he was successful at a young age, but his life took a sharp turn for the worse when he reached middle age. On June 12, 1994, someone followed the barking of a dog and found a man and a woman lying on a snow slope in a mansion in Los Angeles. A leather glove was also scattered beside them. When the police arrived, they found out that one of the dead was Simpson's ex-wife Nicole, who was stabbed 8 times and her head was almost chopped off. The other dead was Lang Goldman, who was stabbed 27 times. It was rumored that he was Nicole's mistress. In fact, he was a waiter. He came to return Nicole's glasses that he had forgotten in the restaurant that night. He must have happened to run into the murderer or was mistaken for a mistress and was killed. Based on past experience, the police sent the suspected target to the light was aimed at Simpson because Nico had been beaten and abused by him many times before. There were 7 or 8 police reports. Nico also told the police station operator that he would kill him one day. Unable to bear the domestic violence, Nico finally chose to divorce. But Simpson's jealousy and control were so strong that they were abnormal. Although divorced, he did not allow Nico to date any man. He even repeatedly stepped forward to stop and intimidate Nico. He forced him to repeat everything he saw and said to him. Since there was no search warrant, the Forest police planned to go to Simpson's house in the name of notifying the family. Sure enough, when they arrived, they found a white SUV parked outside the door. There were a lot of bloodstains on the cab and the body of the car. The door was dark for a long time and no one opened it. A man named Führer, the police officer, climbed over the wall and entered the house alone. Then he found bloodstains in the corridor and driveway. There was also a bloody glove scattered in the backyard of the house. It couldn't be said to be very similar to the one at the crime scene, but it could be said to be exactly the same. Based on these on-site evidence, the police listed Simpson as the number 1 suspect. On June 17, the police officially issued an arrest warrant for Simpson. Unexpectedly, he and his friend drove an SUV to escape from the city. This is the scene we saw at the beginning. If Simpson was an ordinary person, he would have been shot in the head long ago. The problem is that he is a black man and a well-known celebrity. You must know that racial discrimination in Los Angeles was very serious at that time. The police were public servants in front of white people, but they scolded, beat and arrested black people. The anger of the black group in the different law enforcement was aroused. The momentum kept building up and many riots broke out. Simpson has always been regarded by black people as a hero who broke through the prejudice of white society. When he was rounded up by the whole city, many black fans were shouting for him on the roadside. If the police shot him rashly, it would probably cause a large-scale riot. So this city-wide roundup looked more like escorting the president's car. Finally, after 8 hours of pursuit and interception, Simpson surrendered. According to the evidence at the scene in his escape, it was basically clear that Simpson was the murderer. If he had nothing to hide, why would he run away? But the strange thing is that Simpson has always insisted that he is innocent. For this reason, he spent a lot of money to hire the most famous dream lawyer team in the United States to defend himself. On the day of the trial, the prosecutor representing the country first listed the following main evidence. First, Simpson, the bloody gloves found at the crime scene were identified as the same pair of gloves found at the crime scene. The gloves also contained blood and hair from Nico and Long Gorman. Second, the shoe prints found near the body matched Simpson's casual shoes. Only 299 pairs of these high-end shoes were sold. Although Simpson denied that he had bought such ugly shoes, a photo of him wearing them at a public event showed that he wore them. Third, the bloodstains found at the crime scene matched Simpson's after DNA testing. Fourth, the bloodstains left on Simpson's car and in the house were identified as belonging to him, Nico, and Long Gorman. Fifth, the police found a pair of bloody socks at Simpson's home. After identification, the bloodstains belonged to him and Nico. In addition, based on Simpson's past domestic violence records and his schedule on that day, he had plenty of time and space to commit the crime. Motives. All of this seemed to be ironclad evidence enough to bring Simpson to justice. But then several doubts raised by Simpson's defense team brought a shocking reversal to the whole case. First, police officer Fu Yauman said that when he found the leather gloves at Simpson's house, the blood on them was wet. He found the gloves 7 hours after the crime. Under the climatic conditions at the time, the blood had dried up long ago, unless the gloves were placed in a sealed bag and stopped evaporating. Fu Yauman actually climbed over the wall and searched Simpson's house alone without a search warrant. Therefore, the defense lawyer suspected that the glove was picked up by Fu Yaoman from the crime scene to frame him. This was a dramatic scene. In order to prove that Simpson was the murderer, the prosecution did not let him wear the bloody glove on the spot. As a result, Simpson had to work very hard. It was hard to imagine that he could stab two adults 35 times in a row with such a glove. He had to jump out of the hole he dug himself. Then the prosecutor changed his words and refuted that the gloves would shrink if they were stained with blood. However, through experiments, it was found that this kind of high-end gloves had been pre-shrunk and the size would not change because of blood. In addition, Simpson had a wound on his left hand. The police determined that it was an injury he suffered when fighting with the victim. There was no blood on the inside of the two gloves. Second, the police collected evidence at the scene with bare hands and even covered Nico's body with a blanket in the house, causing cross-contamination of fingerprints and blood, destroying the crime scene. Third, the police asked Simpson to draw a blood sample on the second day of the crime. In order to prevent the blood sample from clotting, EDTA was added to it according to routine practice. That is, preservatives. However, after the police received the blood samples, they did not immediately submit them for testing. Instead, they took the blood samples back to the crime scene 30 kilometers away and stayed there for 3 hours. What was even more surprising was that the police found EDTA in several key bloodstains of Simpson. The component was not detected around the bloodstains. This ruled out the possibility that detergent would remain on the socks. According to the testimony of the nurse at the police station, he drew about 8 milliliters of blood from Simpson, but the total blood samples in the police laboratory only had 6.5 milliliters. And the remaining 1.5 milliliters disappeared. The shapes of the two bloodstains on the white socks found in Simpson's home were exactly the same. Two different people in different positions had exactly the same shapes. It was such a coincidence. Therefore, Bian Fang suspected that it was smeared artificially. In addition, there was this photo of Simpson's bloodstains. There was bloodstains on July 3rd, but there was no bloodstains on June 13th, the day after the crime. Based on the above points, Bian Fang suspected that Simpson's bloodstains were probably framed by the police. Why did the police frame him? This requires the key role of this case, Officer Furman. During the preliminary investigation, almost all the important evidence was discovered by him. After much collection, Simpson's legal team found that Furman had made many racial discrimination and insulting remarks against black people. And they were all recorded. When attorney Bian Fang asked whether he framed and fabricated false evidence, Furman remained silent. In other words, he did not deny it. Then attorney Bian Fang gave an impassioned and inflammatory speech on the theme of race. At this time, the criminal trial of Simpson had gradually turned into a moral trial of the policeman Furman. The chess killing case also rose to the height of racial confrontation. On October 3, 1995, after 8 days of trial, the Simpson case was finally over. The Simpson murder case came to a final verdict on the day of the trial. Thousands of policemen were stationed around the court in full gear, fearing that the verdict would trigger riots among black people. When the news of Simpson's acquittal came out, countless black people cheered in the streets, while white people shook their heads and sighed. 1 year after the verdict, 77% of white people still believed that Simpson was guilty, while 72% of black people were convinced that he was innocent. The truth of the case was no longer the focus of people's attention. It seemed unimportant who the real murderer was. He had become a crossbar in the racial confrontation. Nico's family had long been forgotten by the public. No one knew that the old man, the father, was still standing far away crying, throwing out racial emotions. Did Simpson kill his ex-wife Nicole? I personally think he did. At least he is the biggest suspect. For example, the footprints at the crime scene. Why did Simpson's hair appear on the shoes and gloves? The defense did not give a positive response to these questions, including the size of the gloves. At that time, in order to protect the evidence, Simpson first wore a plastic glove and then a leather glove. In addition, he suffered from arthritis and did not take medicine in prison, which caused his joints to swell. So the gloves were very dry and difficult to wear. Moreover, the defense lawyers only proved that the police had many violations when collecting evidence. There is no direct evidence to prove that Furman framed Simpson. On the other hand, the multiple pieces of evidence presented by the prosecution directly point to Simpson. Although both sides speculated through circumstantial evidence, the prosecution's evidence was obviously more powerful. However, although Simpson was highly suspected, I agree with the court's final verdict. Does it sound contradictory? In fact, it is not contradictory at all. First of all, there is a very important principle in the law called innocent once guilty. Among all the evidence, if even one link cannot prove that you are a murderer, then you are innocent. Therefore, evidence such as footprints and hair are not enough to support the entire chain of evidence. At that time, the Chinese detective Li Changyu also said a very classic saying: if a fly appears in a bowl of noodles, we will not be stupid enough to look for the second or third fly, but will pour out the whole bowl of noodles. In other words, if the blood is forged, then the footprints and hair can also be forged. Then why should the principle of innocent once guilty be established? Because if the court mistakenly releases a bad guy, it only means letting go of a real criminal. But if it wrongly accuses a good guy, it means not only letting go of the real criminal, but also sacrificing an innocent good guy. Therefore, in British and American law, it is better to release 1,000 by mistake than to kill one by mistake. This avoids injustice to a certain extent, the creation of a false and wrongful conviction. 4 months after Simpson was acquitted, Nico's family filed a civil lawsuit with evidence such as footprints. Interestingly, Simpson eventually lost the case and was ordered to pay $33 million in compensation. Because civil litigation is between individuals and it is about preponderance of evidence. As long as the plaintiff presents more than 51% of the evidence, he can win the case. But criminal litigation is between the state and the individual. Facing the powerful state machinery, the defendant has almost no defense. Therefore, in order to avoid abuse of power, his evidence standard is much higher than that of civil litigation. The entire chain of evidence is indispensable. The above-mentioned, innocent once, is based on this point. After being sentenced to a sky-high compensation, Simpson registered a large number of shell companies and transferred all his personal property, resulting in the court only executing items worth 500 yuan. Although he escaped legal punishment twice, he did not escape the condemnation of public opinion. The entire upper-class society directly kicked him out of the group chat. When the neighbors saw him, they all gave him the middle finger. Simpson, who was gradually marginalized, moved to another city and mixed with gangsters all day long. In order to make a living, he relied on his remaining fame to perform everywhere, record vulgar programs, and even wrote a book called If I Did It, with the gimmick of the concubine murder case. This is simply using the blood from the previous period to smear the steamed buns. However, Simpson's story is not over yet. He has gone through many storms and waves, but he never expected that he would capsize in the gutter. When the court enforced Simpson's property, many valuable collections and sports souvenirs were divided up in advance by his friends. These souvenirs were sold one after another by his friends. Simpson was very angry when he found out and shouted that he wanted to bring these thieves to justice. In September 2007, when Simpson learned that a friend was trading his sports souvenirs again, he rushed in with a group of friends and forced them to rob all the souvenirs and the mobile phones and wallets of both parties to the transaction at gunpoint. In Simpson's words, he just came to take back what belonged to him, but he didn't expect that this would turn into an armed robbery. Although there were no casualties and no excessive loss of wealth, the court sentenced Simpson to 33 years in prison for multiple crimes. It is a coincidence that the verdict was announced on October 3rd, the same month and day as the acquittal of that year. The 33-year prison sentence seems to be based on the 33 million civil lawsuit compensation. Therefore, some people think that this was done intentionally by the white judge in order to retaliate against the verdict of that year. On April 10, 2024, Simpson died of illness. His legendary life came to an end. The truth of the concubine murder case was buried with him. There is still a lot of controversy about the verdict of that year. But as Professor Luo Shang said, there is no perfect justice in the world. Just like no one can draw a perfect circle, we can only pursue a limited or even flawed justice through reasonable legal procedures. If we leave the legal procedures and rely solely on people's enthusiasm and emotions to pursue the so-called justice, it may cause greater injustice. Ming Pao Canada, Ming Pao Toronto. But Simpson's story is not over yet. He had gone through many storms but never expected to capsize in the gutter. When the court enforced Simpson's property, many valuable collections and sports souvenirs were divided up in advance by his friends. These souvenirs were sold one after another by his friends. Simpson was very angry when he found out and shouted that he wanted to bring these thieves to justice. In September 2007, when Simpson learned that a friend was trading his sports souvenirs again, he rushed in with a group of friends and forced them to take away all the souvenirs and the mobile phones and wallets of both parties. In Simpson's words, he just came to take back what belonged to him, but he didn't expect that this would turn into an armed robbery. Although there were no casualties and no major financial losses, the court sentenced Simpson to 33 years in prison for multiple crimes. It was a coincidence. The announcement date was exactly October 3rd, the same month and day as his acquittal that year. The 33 years in prison seemed to be based on the 33 million civil lawsuit compensation. Therefore, some people think that this was done intentionally by the white judge in order to retaliate against the verdict of that year. On April 10, 2024, Simpson died of illness. His legendary life came to an end. The truth of the concubine murder case was buried with him. There is still a lot of controversy about the verdict of that year. But as Professor Luo Shang said, there is no perfect justice in the world. Just like no one can draw a perfect circle, we can only pursue a limited or even flawed justice through reasonable legal procedures. If we leave the legal procedures and rely solely on people's enthusiasm and emotions to pursue the so-called justice, it may cause greater injustice. Ming Pao Canada, Ming Pao Toronto. But Simpson's story is not over yet. He had gone through many storms but never expected to capsize in the gutter. When the court enforced Simpson's property, many valuable collections and sports souvenirs were divided up in advance by his friends. These souvenirs were sold one after another by his friends. Simpson was very angry when he found out and shouted that he wanted to bring these thieves to justice. In September 2007, when Simpson learned that a friend was trading his sports souvenirs again, he rushed in with a group of friends and forced them to take away all the souvenirs and the mobile phones and wallets of both parties. In Simpson's words, he just came to take back what belonged to him, but he didn't expect that this would turn into an armed robbery. Although there were no casualties and no major financial losses, the court sentenced Simpson to 33 years in prison for multiple crimes. It was a coincidence. The announcement date was exactly October 3rd, the same month and day as his acquittal that year. The 33 years in prison seemed to be based on the $33 million civil lawsuit compensation. Therefore, some people think that this was done intentionally by the white judge in order to retaliate against the verdict of that year. On April 10, 2024, Simpson died of illness. His legendary life came to an end. The truth of the concubine murder case was buried with him. There is still a lot of controversy about the verdict of that year. But as Professor Luo Shang said, there is no perfect justice in the world. Just like no one can draw a perfect circle, we can only pursue a limited or even flawed justice through reasonable legal procedures. If we leave the legal procedures and rely solely on people's enthusiasm and emotions to pursue the so-called justice, it may cause greater injustice.